have some hypothetical scenario sheets here. And they're not super hypothetical. They're actually, I tried to pull some numbers fairly close to actual city data. The tax numbers are going to be a little bit off. I'll go into that. I want to just talk a little bit about game plan. So yesterday at committee, game plan was presented by our administration. And what that does is really sets the city up for the next 25 years about how we are going to grow the recreation system. So my favorite part about the game plan strategy that came before us was all of the people who came to speak to it. And so many youth came to speak to the game plan strategy, which was really critical and really important because often young voices are not part of democracy. And when I'm talking young, I'm talking like that 18 and under crowd. And why it's so important for them to be part of democracy is because we're building the future for them. And even the decisions that we're making today around recreation may not even affect them. They're going to be well into voting, but they're going to remember these moments. And one of the things I said is their presentations reminded me of an experience that I had, probably took for granted at that time, but I got to be part of the opening ceremonies for the soccer center in 1992. But that was because of city funding. Now, I had no idea I could go speak to the city about city funding if I even needed to go speak to the city about city funding at that time. But here we heard from almost 30 youth yesterday about the need for funding and how early some of these kids are waking up as early as 4 a.m. to go have practices at like 5, 6 a.m. And we're talking about soccer players, we're talking about softball players, we're talking about swimmers. So it's really, the more infrastructure we have, the better it is. Now that means if they're waking up early, how those adults who want to continue to recreate, what time are they playing soccer at? I remember when I was playing soccer, we'd have games at like 10 p.m. when I was in university, and I felt like that was late then, and I was a university student. So game plan sets us up. But the overall narrative around game plan yesterday, which was so striking, often when things come before council, we talk about the individuals who can present. It's because they don't want something. They're resistant to change. And I get it. No one really likes change. They're resistant to change. They don't want something to change. They don't like what we're doing. And so they come speak against it. This is one of those moments where people are like, yes, more of this, please. It was a really unifying moment. It was a really good vibe moment. And it was really important because talking about what we do want to become is really, really critical. Because also talking about what we want to become is really important. Then that comes into the conversation about, you're right, how are we going to fund this? Where are we going to get the funding for this? Which will bring me into my next exercise that I want to walk everybody through. But how we fund it is so important. And where we co-locate people next to amenities and services that we are willing to either build new, revise and revamp and rebuild, or invest in new, or invest in rehabilitating is important too, because population metrics matter. So if we have metrics around we want one swimming lane per 75,000 people, where those 75,000 people are in our city and where those swimming lanes are in our city matter as well. And if we have infrastructure that is currently in place, but there's not 75,000 people or 200,000 people around it to surround it, then we get disparity and discrepancy. So it's really about creating that balance between where do we have assets and infrastructure and where are the people living. Which is why there's been a lot of focus on how do we get our neighborhoods, or existing and established neighborhoods, to grow. Because the important thing to remember with this existing neighborhoods is that there's been population decline, and anywhere from 10 to 30%. So the majority of Ward 11 neighborhoods are well below their peak population. Give me a second. Where'd you go? Had to let the dog out. So the majority of Ward 11 neighborhoods are below their peak population, which means that when we're thinking about those ratios of where we want people to live next to amenities, Ward 11 isn't necessarily meeting it. Now, as we grow as a city, and as we grow as a city on our way to 2 million people, when we look at the data and statistics from 2024, 100,000 people moved to our city. Contextually, 100,000 people is Ward 11. 100,000 people is Medicine Hat, is Red Deer. We are having entire new cities move to move to Calgary in just a year alone, and that number isn't going to slow down. So we have to put people somewhere. What I hear from Ward 11 residents all the time is the need to update and upgrade infrastructure and amenities. And so I think of places like Trico. So the Trico Center, some people still call it Family Leisure Center. There's no flat water pool there. If we're going to do that, how do we make sure we have a population that can support it? And how far will people come to drive to it? If we are wanting to rebuild the Southwood Library and co-locate it potentially with Southland Leisure Center, what do we need around that? How are we going to do that? Because some of these spaces aren't serving our populations anymore. So we do need the funding mechanisms for that. We need the capital for it, and we eventually need the operating dollars for it. So in my exercise, I'm going to focus on operating, because predominantly people are wondering why. So earlier this week, we had the update to the local area plans come to council, and the updates to allow RCG broadly across the three local area plans that were approved. So Westbrook, Heritage, and North Hill was defeated. And what that means that RCG is a land right, which is under the land use bylaw, is now nullified in probably 80% of properties that were previously RC1 or RC2. That's a big deal. So that's a really, really big deal for the market. It has sent ripples through the markets already. That was 91 applications representing 650 homes gone like that, in a time when, again, 100,000 people are moving towards our city. And when we think about the tax uplift that comes to the city as a result, and I'm going to demonstrate that, and how it creates affordability, because people keep talking about how it doesn't create affordability. So I'm going to show you how it creates affordability through taxes. But again, these are putting people next to services that already exist, creating tax uplift to refund new services and amenities in a way that we just cannot do with greenfield growth. So let me walk you through it. This is an existing, we're gonna just call this a community. And so this is an established neighborhood. We're going to just take a block that has 4 homes established. They're all worth $600,000. You can't see it here, but I've said how many people live in these houses now, because we're below peak population. So one of these houses has 3 people living in it. That's a new family who's purchased their first home in an established neighborhood. But the rest of these are down to 2 people. The rest of these are down to 2 people because their kids have moved out. But they're staying in that house because they're an older adult, they're active, they're engaged, they can still mow the lawn, they've got great connections, they know, and so they've stayed. And so the total property value, or the total needed for taxes here, is $10,000. Now, I've basically said $2,000 are allocated to the 5 big buckets: fire, police, transit, roads, and then recreation and libraries. Now, there's lots of other enabling services that go along with all of that, but those are our 5 big buckets of spending, and I've allocated $2,000 to each of those, because that is an average annual property tax of $2,500. So we're just mathing the math per person. So 3, 6, so that's 6. That's 9 people living in these 4 houses. That's $1,100 per person. So let's do greenfield first. What happens if we just want to add more people in the greenfield? Well, let's find that scenario. Here's the greenfield scenario. I'll put these behind so it doesn't shine through. We're going to add some homes in the greenfield. So now 3 people are going to move into each of these homes. But the taxes needed to now serve this brand new community of homes has gone up to $18,000, because they don't have rec and libraries yet, but they have fire, they have police, they have roads we need to service, and they have transit, because these are the essentials that we are needing to provide people in new communities. And rec and libraries are often the slowest things, which is why I didn't add them in. But that's $18,000. Now, the total property value of all the properties have gone up. So what you do is you actually divide this number, this $18,000, by the total value of all properties, and you get what's called a mill rate. And so in this case, the mill rate is 0.0047. So basically 0.0047 dollars for every $1,000 of property. That's essentially what that mill rate works out to be. And so then the established homes here, they're paying $2,800, and these new homes, and they have less of a value. They're about $350,000 because maybe they're a row or a semi. they're paying $16.45. So it's 47. Well, so we're going to say it's like 47.0047. Now, in the original one, it's 0.0042. So even in this example alone, where you simply just go from an established neighborhood to adding 4 new homes in a greenfield, your taxes have gone up if you're in an established neighborhood. So what happens if you add row housing instead? Oh, and the taxes per person in this scenario, they've gone down a little bit. They've gone down to $857 instead of, following all my sheets here, instead of $1,100 per person. But what happens if you just add rows? So what happens if you take one of those properties where 2 people were living and you add in a fourplex? Well, you only need $10,000 still, because we don't really need it to increase the services, because again, we're just recovering the population for the services. We're not necessarily needing at this point to add more services. So what happens to the mill rate when you add up the value, the total value? So it's taxes needed by total divided by the total value of all properties, and you get a new mill rate of 0.0026. Your tax rate has gone down for the exact same services. And per person, because these now all have 3 people in them, 2 people living upstairs and 1 person living in the basement, we've kept our 3-person home and 2 other 2-person homes, you're now paying $526 per person for the exact same municipal services. Tell me that isn't affordability when your tax rate is going down. So why are taxes going up in Calgary? Taxes are going up in Calgary because we're doing more of this. Now, even if you add a scenario where you add rows and greenfield growth, it's 0.0033. When you add in this, because you're back up to $18,000 and you're now at $620, so yeah, your taxes have gone down, but not near the same rate as when you simply add rows in established neighborhoods. So why do I continue to vote in favor of densifying our existing neighborhoods? Because when we talk about affordability, when we talk about the dollars you pay on a per person basis or on the mill rate basis to serve the entire city, this is the least economical way to grow our city. Because every time it costs these people more, because they are subsidizing what's happening here, because they have better services. But we are building out services that we have to deliver on day one of these homes opening: fire, police, transit, roads. And it takes a long time for the values of these homes to catch up to the values of these homes to create stabilization in terms of a tax. So I continue, and then look, in the long run, we cannot do all growth in established neighborhoods. I recognize that. So we're doing this. So yes, doing a combination of both is the balance that we need, because it's allowing us to collect the taxes that we need to cover, but lower per person and the total lower mill rate than this scenario. So it's really, really important that we have some of this, which is why I continue to vote for it, and why when residents tell me that they want to keep taxes low and slow the rate of growth of taxes, why they want amenities and services protected in their neighborhoods, because we have to put the population back there. Because again, even if I look at this scenario, the services that we need to deliver on a bare minimum are costing $1,100 per person. $1,100 per person. The minute we move and we just add one set of row, $526 per person. Tell me that's not a better deal. So, and tell me that's not more people using the services that already exist. We're not adding any staffing here. We're running all the same things. We're just running them at a better capacity. And I get it. I get that change in neighborhoods is hard, but we are really restabilizing populations in order to deliver on the best value for Calgarians. And because people are not moving out of their homes, because I'm at my dad's house right now in Edmonton, same as my stepmom, this is a 4-bedroom home. It's big. I love it because we all have a room to stay when we come here. And that's why they've kept it, because they can do that. But that means that if that's the majority of their neighborhood, or the majority of Oak Ridge, or the majority of Mayfair Bel Air, or the majority of most of our neighborhoods where people are aging in place in their homes until they are 80 plus. And when we start, especially to look at seniors, 70 plus women are living on their own in homes. We have a big, big gap between the number of people living next to things and the services that are there. Now, I always get asked about schools. The reason our schools are full is not because of the people who are living in existing neighborhoods. It's because kids are getting bussed in from the outskirts because we haven't built schools in the outskirts. That's a different issue. I know neighborhood character or look or feel and housing is going to change. But when we look at great cities around the world, New York, London, Paris, LA, also have their challenges, but they have grown up and we are growing up as a city. And we have to grow up as a city. And the smartest thing that we can do financially for us now and for my kids in the future and your kids in the future and your grandkids in the future is to set ourselves up in a financial situation where they can afford housing, because this is a significantly also different, like $100,000 less. These are hypothetical, but like that is kind of the discrepancy. This is much more affordable. And the tax dollars on this, so it's $1,300 a year versus $1,500 a year. That's a big deal financially for people. And so setting ourselves up for more of this is good. If we could do 1 in every 4 homes, we would be way far ahead. But when we nullify that ability, because now we can maybe do 1 in 10, 1 in 20 with end lots, it's going to take that mill rate is going to keep going up because we don't have enough people and we don't have enough homes to support the services. I could talk about this all day long, but I try to keep it to 15 minutes and I'm already at 16. I would love to answer questions about this. I want to keep the conversation going, but I want to keep talking about why this is so important because, again, those taxes are funding the services that you're asking for in your neighborhoods. Upgraded playgrounds, better sidewalks and pathways, even the water and utility infrastructure, making sure we have enough police, making sure we have enough fire, libraries for everybody, and funding the rec strategy that people are really excited about. So yeah, I do want to collect more tax dollars. I do want to make sure we have stable populations in our established neighborhoods. And just to forget, the more people in a neighborhood, the more people that can volunteer, the more people that can show up. And then when we don't have enough of that right now, like I think about all of these things together. And that's why I have always made the hard decision to say yes to more people in our neighborhoods, because that is the smartest financial future for our city. I hope you all have a really, really great weekend. Happy February. I think this is the first February one. Happy February, and be well.